I'm one of those people that probably didn't really realize how bad their mental health had been for quite a long time. I don't think it's uncommon at all to not realize the gravity of a situation you're in mentally, particularly when we are, like you say, told constantly to suck it up and stick it out and get on with it. I felt like I was constantly fucking up a little bit because I didn't exactly know what we were doing all the time, and I would try and help as much as possible. And then, you're juggling so much, trying to make sure everyone's okay, because theoretically you're the big provider and you should be making sure everyone's okay. That's your job, which isn't an especially helpful mentality to go into. It's such a team sport. What seems like an unassailable situation at the moment will change. The baby will change. They will grow. They will burn. And you will find something to love. You will absolutely find it.
Tom, welcome to The Meaning of Men. What do you want people to take away from our conversation today?
I'd like people to take away how different postnatal depression can look in different people, especially men. I'd like people to know that it does get better. I think it's important to hear that from someone that went through it. You will almost certainly be okay. I think is important.
I think it's going to be a really eye-opening conversation for a lot of people. When I've been speaking with others that I'm going to be doing an episode on postnatal depression, there's a lot of eyebrows raised, a lot of, is postnatal depression a thing in men? And I've actually spoken to medical professionals about this as well. And again, just surprised when it's brought up. I want to run through some quick stats, actually, that I was looking at before our call, just to maybe paint a picture for people, to give them an idea of what the situation actually looks like. So 1 in 10 men will suffer from postnatal depression, although some studies say it could be as high as 1 in 5. Only 26% of fathers experiencing postnatal depression symptoms will seek professional help. 70% of fathers with postnatal depression say they feel the pressure to tough it out and avoid discussions about their emotions. And studies suggest that men will experience drops in testosterone and increases in cortisol and estrogen when they become fathers, which can be a big contributing factor to postnatal depression. So there's some pretty stark numbers there. But our conversation today is moving away from the numbers. It's having a real conversation with someone that's actually been through this, talking about your experience pre, during, but also coming through that as well. And as you said there, just giving people hopefully a beacon of hope. And I think what's actually really interesting is that when we spoke last week, I don't think personally that I went through postnatal depression when I had my 2 children. Yeah. But what was fascinating is that when we were talking and you were telling me some of the things that you were experiencing, I was like, I did go through that and I did suppress that and I did think about that. So I think whether you think you're going through postnatal depression or not, this will be, again, a real eye-opening conversation and make you realise that actually you might have been going through some stuff that you didn't even realise before.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what the family looks like. Give us a sense of who Tom Bailey is.
Okay. I'm an actor. I have been married to my wife for just over 2 years now, but we've known each other for quite a long time. Our son, Murdo, who is walking and talking and shouting and throwing spoons on the floor, as they're wont to do. And yeah, I think I'm one of those people that probably didn't really realize how bad their mental health had been for quite a long time. I think it's, I mean, like you've literally just highlighted, when someone talks about symptoms they've had, experiences they've had, and they call it something like depression, it can really sideline you. Like, I think I had a conversation with a therapist a while ago where I described how I'd been feeling, this is pre-baby, how I'd been feeling sometimes. She was like, oh, okay, so how long have you been suicidal then? I was like, I'm not. I don't think. Okay, so right. And then you sort of, when someone sort of sits you down and says, this is what we would as medical professionals classify as a certain thing, it can be quite alarming. And I think a load of men, I'm always amazed at how often my friends can be open and emotionally vulnerable and then say something like, but I'm not depressed. I'm like, sure, very good. Carry on as you were. So yeah, I don't think it's uncommon at all to not realize the gravity of a situation you're in mentally, particularly when we are, like you say, told constantly to suck it up and stick it out and get on with it, which isn't always entirely helpful.
Take us back to the time where you first found out you were going to be a dad. How did you feel? How did you take the news? Is it something you'd always thought about, being a father? What were those emotions like for you in the early days of finding out?
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying for a couple of months. We were quite lucky. We actually found out, we got the first positive pregnancy test our first week on holiday with Sarah's family, the first day of holiday. And when you sort of take the test, you're supposed to, they say any line, no matter how faint it is, any line is a positive test. It was a very faint line. It was a very, very, very faint line. Borderline non-existent. I was like, I mean, there are degrees of this, surely. So my first thought was like, are we pregnant? I'm not 100% sure. But no, we absolutely were. And I was immediately thrilled, I think, because obviously it's something I had, and this probably isn't a similar experience to everyone, but I think it's probably quite common. I had always assumed I was going to have children. I'd always wanted to meet an amazing person to have children with. I'm a very sort of home-orientated person. The idea of having a nice, cozy house with my nice, cozy family is sort of the most important thing I think I can imagine having. I think everything else is sort of compromisable. But I'd like to have a family, and I'd like to enjoy them and see them. So I was immediately thrilled. And then I think I remember we sort of said last week, you can academically appreciate everything that's about to happen to you. You can academically know what's going to happen, right? Your life is going to change in this way, in this way, in this way. This happened to my friend. This happened to my brother or my sister or anything. It actually happening is completely different. I think we had a reasonably smooth pregnancy. A couple of it like ups and downs, but nothing major. So when it sort of came to having him, we were sort of ready. We'd prepared. Everything was good to go. We had to have a C-section because he was breech. So we knew the date. We knew the time. It was all very planned. And then I think in the hospital, when you have the new life you created with your wife or partner in your arms, and it's amazing and incredible, but also you realize that that's very, very real and not academic at all. This is in practice now, your child for the rest of your life. And I think that was quite an immediate, quite big, not thunderclap, but certainly like oh shit, this is a big deal now. Okay, great. I'll immediately start changing nappies. And why is it black and gungy? They said something about that in antenatal class, but I can't remember. Okay, here we go. He's screamed for an hour. Amazing. So it was I think it was quite a shock quite quickly. But then I think that's probably, I don't know how you even begin to like actually prepare for it like properly, unless you're deluding yourself completely, or it's child number 5 and you've done it loads and loads and loads of times.
Yeah, I remember distinctly with Eleanor, my daughter, my first child, when she was born, and you're in the hospital, and then you just kind of get told, because everything was okay with us, oh, you can go now.
Yeah.
You think, am I ready? Am I qualified to take a human life and like look after it on my own? It's like, it's crazy. But it's like, but what do you expect? The nurse to come home with you and like stay with you for a week?
Absolutely.
You're absolutely right. You can do the antenatal classes, which we did. You can read all the books you want, which are helpful to a point. But until you actually have that life that in your hands that you're looking after, it's just crazy.
When we got home the first time, we hadn't put the heating on, and it was November, and the house, there'd been a bit of a cold snap, and the house was absolutely freezing. And he'd been in a warm hospital and warm blankets for the first, however old it was, 36 hours of his life. Then all of a sudden, he's in a cold room. It's in a totally different environment. There's a cat. It's all quite weird. And he immediately kicked off for about an hour. And I think that was our first real, like, okay, this is our home. This is our safe space. This is where we're our most comfortable. We can't hide from this here. This is no longer a peaceful, tranquil place for us to hang out in. This is now there's a lot of noise here very, very quickly, which was that was a bit of an awakening.
Was there a particular point or something that happened, a moment in time where you felt that something was emotionally off, something was a bit different, you weren't quite feeling how you thought you would?
Yeah, so I think, again, I'd imagine this is a lot more common than people would like to admit. I hope this is more common than people would like to admit. We were told by a couple of mates that like the first 2 weeks were idyllic and it was perfect, and they had their lovely baby and they were in bed and it was really nice and it was easily managed. And if that was their experience, absolutely, that's valid. It's amazing, beautiful, and well done. It was quite hard for us for the first couple of weeks because there is that massive adjustment. And I think I was expecting not to necessarily feel 100% enamored immediately, because I'm aware that's maybe a little bit Hollywood, maybe a little bit sort of what people say, because realistically the truth of how it can feel is alarming and worrying quite quickly. So I think for me, quite early on, academically, I was expecting to not necessarily feel a certain way, but then to very much not feel a certain way was hard. And again, we sort of briefly touched upon last week, is that I tried to, very early on, I tried to maintain that there were sort of two situations that were going on. You're meeting your son, your baby, who is faultless in this entire process, right? Is a totally new, pure life with zero baggage. And then there is the functional process of having a baby, which is complicated, busy, stressful. And then you throw a load of sleep deprivation on top of that. And you throw a load of like your self-care rituals going completely out the window. I used to run a lot. I used to cook a lot. I used to spend hours playing video games. That immediately stops when you have a baby, because you have a very tangible, very vocal responsibility.
Yeah, the other thing about those first 2 weeks, there feels like there's a lot of pressure, because there's people talking about the bonding, the skin to skin. Yeah. So I remember, again, particularly with Eleanor, just this like, right, we need to nail this first 2 weeks. If I don't feel attached to the baby and vice versa in that 2 weeks, it's over. Like, we're never going to have a bond. Like, and it's just, it does put a lot of pressure on. You're absolutely right. And as you said, you add on sleep deprivation and everything like that. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And we found like little things no one talks about, like the hallucinating is insane. Like there were times, I don't know, I'm assuming loads of people's experience with this is quite similar, because we heard stories from our mate. Because we didn't sleep with the baby in our bed. He was in a cot next to our bed. But the amount of times I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a bundle of duvet underneath me and be convinced for about 2 minutes that I was asleep on top of the baby, and that I didn't, and I know I'd gone to sleep with the baby in it, and that's the baby, and it's on my chest, and it's not the baby, it's a cushion, or it's a teddy, or whatever. That was weird. Because, yeah, that's sort of an aspect that I would have thought people would explain that. Like, at some stage, you're going to wake up in the morning, you're going to think you've smothered your baby. You won't. It's fine. But to go through that like 3 or 4 times in the course of 2 weeks it just bombards your senses, your emotions, your brain power are just sort of under quite a constant assault from different things that you're trying to make sure you're getting right. Because like you say, you don't have to, obviously. That's not a good lesson to take away at all. You want to nail this, right? You want to be the best dad you can be for your partner. First of all, I think for me, my main priority was Sarah for the first loads of months, because they've just done a borderline magical thing with their body that's frankly ridiculous and I don't understand at all. And then if they're doing breastfeeding, that can have all its complications. If they've been heavy on the research when you haven't necessarily been, because my brain doesn't work especially well that way, whereas Sarah's does. So Sarah was a well of information and compassion to me, but I kind of felt like I was constantly fucking up a little bit because I didn't exactly know what we were doing all the time, and I would try and help as much as possible. And then sometimes you feel like you can get in the way and that there's lots you have to, again, you're juggling so much trying to make sure everyone's okay, because theoretically you're the big provider and you should be making sure everyone's okay. That's your job, which isn't an especially helpful mentality to go into. It's such a team sport.
Were you aware at the time that you might have been experiencing postnatal depression? Did it cross your mind that was what was going on, or did you just think, well, this is just part of the course, this is just kind of what happens?
Yeah, I think a mixture of both. I think it takes a while for it to set in. I think with depression in the past, I've always tried to sort of try and keep tabs on, okay, is this something circumstantial I'm reacting to that's making me feel bad? Or am I in a low point? Because there's sort of different ways you have to navigate. I've had to navigate my brain and my life when I'm in those sort of 2 different situations. So I was trying to figure out, is this just a hard situation we're in that was a little unexpected and that we sort of had to adapt to quicker than we thought we would, or it would affect us differently than we thought we would? Or is this long form chemical, medical sat? I tried to get on top of that quite quickly, but I just thought it was rough for a bit, really. And then it sort of occurred to me that it actually probably wasn't.
And what were some of the symptoms that you were experiencing during this time?
I think a lot of like real quite quick flashes of anger. Like sort of out of nowhere at a baby who is 3 weeks old and totally blameless in everything that is going on. And like I've struggled with invasive thoughts as long as I can remember. To have invasive thoughts about hurting a baby is hard because you couple that with your idea of yourself, which is presumably that I'm a nice person who isn't weird or violent. And then you have what I was aware at the time were invasive thoughts that I am capable of ignoring. It's fine. But to still have them in the first place is quite, oh, okay. I'm not actually angry and violent. I'm just reacting badly to a situation. You sort of had to really sort of talk myself through it. But then by that stage, I was aware that people are probably talking about this somewhere online. We've been given a couple of sheets of paper. Let's have a look at them and let's maybe address this as a more serious issue than I think it is, because I was aware that I might not necessarily be a reliable narrator. I'm going to want to convince myself it's fine as a self-preservation method, but I'm no longer trustworthy, if that makes any kind of sense. I can't trust my own opinion on whether or not it's like the police. The police have investigated themselves and it turns out it's all fine. Like, I don't want to do that to myself. I don't want to, self-diagnose, actually turns out everything's okay, when there is a big nagging voice in the back of my head that is very clearly not okay.
Yeah, and as you were saying, it's this feeling of responsibility for your partner, responsibility for your son. It's almost like, again, I remember feeling this, and I don't think I did go through postnatal depression, but I do genuinely remember thinking, I've just got to park my emotions. Like, I know that's not healthy, but there's just no time to think
Yeah, yeah,
about like how I'm feeling or how I'm doing, because there's two more important people here. And that's not trying to that's not trying to sound like I'm putting myself on a pedestal or anything like that. It's just how you feel naturally when this happens. And you can suppress, I think, a lot of how you're really feeling. And
Mm.
also, people don't generally tend to ask how you're doing. That's certainly been my experience, and when I've spoken to other guys as well, it's how's the baby doing, how's the mother doing, which is absolutely right, but it's not often that you're asked, well, how are you doing? And so again, it's just like another reason you think to just kind of park how you're feeling and try to ignore it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It starts to feel like it doesn't matter because you've got a job to do, which is, like you say, not necessarily the healthiest way to go about things. Who knows? But it's a survival instinct, isn't it? It's a needs must kind of situation.
And I guess, would you have felt maybe a sense of shame as well about talking to people about how you really felt,
Yeah.
because again, you should be, you know, the person that's kind of keeping everything together.
Mm.
So, yeah, did that sort of cross your mind as well?
Yeah, the shame came, I think, a big chunk of the shame came from hearing about friends who had harder births, less amenable, for want of a better term, babies. Like, we've been pretty lucky with the baby. He's always been a pretty good sleeper once we got the routine down. He's been a pretty good eater. He can scream the house down, but he's never been colic. So feeling like you're struggling with what is theoretically an easier task, that was hard. I think that's where most of my shame came from, because I've been like, with my friends, I've been quite open when I've been like down or rough. If someone asked me how I was doing, I would say like, "Oh, bad, actually," um, and the response would tend to be like, "Oh, that sucks." Be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." There's nothing we can really do about it, so I don't know. Yeah, how's Sarah? Yeah, she's great. She's doing really well. And then, yeah, there was an awareness that I wasn't amazing, but I don't know. I don't really think there was much anyone could have done at the time, really. Um, which is why it can feel isolating, even if you have good support and even if you have good friends, which I do. I have very good support, very good friends, but it can still feel, yeah, because like you say, no one talks about it. So it can, if someone had responded to me with, I felt exactly the same. This is spot on what was happening to me, and this is how I dealt with it. Um, that might have been a little bit different. But then again, I don't exactly sit down all my friends that I know that are about to have kids and be like, cool. So when you really want to squeeze the baby, don't. Of course you don't talk to people like that because it's scary and worrying. You don't want to freak people out. They're about to have this amazing thing.
Before we dive back into the episode, if you're enjoying these conversations, please do hit that subscribe button and leave a review. These two actions really make a huge difference and help the show reach more people who can benefit from these discussions. Let's keep building this community together. Thanks for being part of it. Back to the episode. Was there a particularly hard point or a particular low moment for you during that period that you can recollect?
Yeah. So I think there was a putting down of the baby. We were probably in about month 2. So around the 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. And he was really, 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 really screaming. Sarah was downstairs. And yeah, I had this like overwhelming urge to just squeeze the baby, like real hard. Not because it was like an automatic reaction. I wanted to let the baby know that I was really annoyed and upset. And I found myself like tightening up and squeezing, and I was like, right, here we go, put the baby down. Because I think a lot of the literature we got about postnatal depression for mums and stuff that was like, it's okay to leave the room, put the baby down gently and go outside for 2 minutes. It doesn't say when you have like a violent thought towards your kid, it's like, just whack them on the sofa and go downstairs, it'll be fine. And yeah, when that happened, that was probably the big, like, not cool. Because even though, like, like I say, I'm capable of and have for a long time fought invasive thoughts, but you don't want to gamble on that not happening. Like, if they're going to come, they're going to come, and you want to deal with them and get through them and learn how to sort of address them and compartmentalize them. But you only got to fuck up once, and that's going to be a bad one. So that was probably the worst moment.
Did you tell anyone about that?
Immediately told Sarah. I've been open with it with like my mates since as well. It's not like, I don't know, I think I was sort of umming and ahhing about this because it's so hard to, if you want to be open and talk about how you felt and what you did and what happened, it sort of doesn't make a massive amount of sense to me to like not share the extreme of it a little bit, to not address the like, well, if I'm going to talk about it being bad, well, then I'm not going to pretend it wasn't bad. Like that's as bad as it got. And even like now I'm aware that that's like in the grand scheme of horrible things people have done to babies, there's been a whole lot worse, but like that's as bad as I felt. Like I do. Yeah. Like I say, I'm not a violent or angry person. And in that moment I was violent and angry to a 2-month-old. Okay. So yeah, I told Sarah, and that was probably the best thing I could have done in the situation. I think, like I said, she is just an endless well of compassion and understanding. So instead of freaking out and taking her baby away and staying at her dad's, we had a chat. We talked about what I wanted to do going forward. I immediately started looking at the resources we were given, booked a call with someone, had a chat. And that's probably the beginning of it starting to feel better, I think.
And it's very easy to sit here now and talk rationally about, Murdo was only 2 months old at the time, and what was I thinking? But when you're in the moment, it's just you are just not thinking like that at all. Your reality is just so different, and I'm sure that so many people listening will be able to kind of relate to that. Even 5 minutes later, you can just almost like laugh about it, depending on what's happened, but in that moment, it really does feel like the end of the world. It really does feel like something really, really bad is happening and you just feel horrendous. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I found this. It doesn't matter how many times you experience it. Like I've experienced so many moments as a parent where you just want to tear your hair out. You feel just so frustrated and angry and annoyed. And even though I've been in those situations before, and it's different to other things. If I've been in other situations where I've experienced something, I can almost very quickly go to that experience and think, okay, I've gone through that before and I know it's fine. But this is just something completely different. It doesn't matter how many times I've been in that situation, I will not feel any better in that moment. And again, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however, a day later, I'll be like, what was I thinking? But I know the next time that something happens, it's going to be the same process again. It's just so hard to shake.
Yeah, well, it's so environmental, isn't it? Because it's so, for me, I found the sensory overload of a screaming baby has probably never gone away. Like even a year, like because it's obviously by biological function, it's fucking loud and it cuts through everything. And even now, like I hear a newborn crying and my brain goes, that is not very loud at all compared to what we can get now. Like that is tiny. But at the time, that cuts straight through, and it's like jamming a screwdriver in your ear. Like for me, it becomes such an overwhelming noise very, very quickly that I'm aware that like it's just at that stage it's like such a sensory reaction. It's so overwhelming that this little tiny thing is screaming so loud, and I can only imagine that gets worse when they're 4 and arguing back, and they want something that. No, you're not going to have ice cream for dinner. You're going to have a bath and go to bed. But yeah.
It's this feeling. I'm not sure if you feel like this as well, but it's like a trigger that you're doing something wrong, and you feel like you're doing everything you can to do the right thing. You're putting everything into it. You're giving your life to this child, and this screaming is just, it's just like this thing that's telling you that you're not good enough, you're not doing the right thing, which is absolutely not what's happening, but that's kind of how you feel. And I think that's what adds to the frustration. And it's like, I am doing everything I can, I am giving my life to you, and you're just screaming in my face.
Yeah,
and
it's like auditory confirmation of failure, which is not, of course it's not. But it absolutely can. Like, I take failure, I'm trying not to take failure so personally. It's a massive problem, and I try my best not to. But like, there are so many ways to fail as a parent, all the time, and that's totally fine, because everyone does, and you just have to. You're all just learning how to do it. But if you, like me, can be especially hard on yourself when you are even slightly less than perfect at something, which happens all the time, so I should really be used to it by now. It can be, you're taking it personally. You're almost, my self-esteem plummeted, not because of anything anyone else said, but because of how I felt about how I was dealing with it. I felt like I was failing, and that became so. It just spirals and spirals and spirals and spirals and spirals.
Yeah, and there's this thing, I think, with ego as well. You said it right. You do take it personally.
Yeah.
And there is this ego as well that you don't want to feel like you're failing. You actually put it beautifully to me last week. I think it was a friend that said this to you, where you said your child is 1 year old, let's say, and you are 1 year old as a father.
Yeah.
I've actually told that to a few people since then, because I think that's such a wonderful way of looking at it. Again, when you're in the moment of something crazy happening, I'm not saying you're going to be thinking that rationally.
No.
But it is a lovely reminder that you are at such an early stage as a father or as a parent. You are learning as much as they are. It's, I love that.
Yeah, it was one of the guys on my anti-age group when we had a beer. It was probably further down the line than it should have been, considering how many of us probably needed support and help. It was hard to get everyone together. But yeah, I mean, that became such like it's such a thing to like hang on to, because it's not even just reevaluating how you're doing and stuff. It's just whatever helps you cut yourself some slack, I think, is massively important. Whatever helps you not be horrible to yourself, I think, is useful. And yeah, trying to maintain the idea that you're going to be new at this until you're 60. Like your first child is always going to be the first. You're going to have first when they have first at the same time. Like, you're not going to have any experience parenting a 30-year-old. Like, you're not going to have any experience parenting a 15-year-old. A 45-year-old dad with 3 kids could still be your child while they're going through a divorce, and you've still got to be a parent during that. It's all, when you're not going to be able to learn how to do it before you do it. And the best thing you can do is learn how to deal with not doing it well, because you're not going to do it well on kids. So you've got to, it's all learning, isn't it? It's constant learning. And that's fine. That's amazing. That's good.
Talk to me a little bit more about the relationship with Sarah, because I'm keen for people that are listening that have partners, and also for the partners to help with their husbands and boyfriends as well. Did any of this affect the marriage in any way? Was there a time where you felt like you were maybe keeping your true feelings from Sarah? I know that you said from that particular instant you went to her pretty quickly about that, but in the build up to that, were there times where you felt that you were maybe hiding some things from her that you wanted to be talking to her about?
I think I probably wanted to address things sooner. I probably would have wanted to make it clearer that I was sadder, but it came less from hiding it from her and just not wanting to bum her out. Like, just not wanting to make her sad. Because if she's struggling, and she did a bit, we've been really good at supporting each other through various mental health episodes throughout our entire relationship. That is something I'll happily hang a hat on. We've been good at that. We're very lucky. The communication has always been pretty open and healthy, which is amazing. But it hasn't come from a sense of trying to hide something from her to get away with it. It's come from a sense of hiding something from her because, well, if she's having a good day, I don't want to shit on that day. Like, she's having a nice time. She's feeling good. Fucking one of us should be feeling good. So carry on. You do you. Like, have a lovely day. I'll be quiet in the corner, panicking slowly. It'll be fine. And then tomorrow, if you're still having a good day, then maybe I'll ruin that day and we can talk about it. But for now, it was useful to feel like I did genuinely feel like there was nothing I couldn't talk to her about. I felt like that throughout our whole marriage, really, our whole relationship, really. So yeah, the open communication that we'd established very early on was incredibly useful. I could imagine it being very hard to navigate that situation if you don't have that. I don't know what we would have done I don't know how I would have approached it if we didn't already talk like that. That would have been horrible. But yeah, it changed things because it becomes hard to, if you're both having a rough time, because normally you sort of rely on the other person to be in a slightly better place to help you get back to their level. But if you're both having an issue, then you're adding responsibility to your depression to help someone else with their depression, which is, for want of a better term, part of the gig. And that's what you sign up for. But it doesn't necessarily mean it comes easily.
Were there any signs that Sarah noticed in you that you might have been struggling that she sort of told you retrospectively?
Yeah, I think because I'm not an especially, I pretend to be a lot moodier than I am, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not like, I'm reasonably easygoing. I can just be a bit socially awkward and grumpy. But I'm fundamentally, I think, at least once I've found my little happy comforter and quite a happy person, there's probably 1,000 people that would tell you that's not true. But I think she was quite aware that I wasn't exactly jumping for joy at the situation we'd found ourselves in 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line. Because sort of by that stage, we'd already had quite a few talks about it. But feeling like I wasn't getting any better was hard because, well, I was getting better. But feeling like I wasn't permanently fine after a while was hard. Because again, you don't want to bring the mood down. You want to make sure everyone's okay, and you want to you almost feel responsible for adding to, if she's having a bad time, you're adding to it. And you should only ever be making her life better and easier.
Yeah, I can relate to that. There are definitely times in my relationship where I feel like there's this balancing act going on where if I'm struggling, then my wife will kind of pick me up and vice versa. And it does work well to a point, but I think it's difficult if you are both struggling that one of you will have to suppress that. And I guess sometimes that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
But I think it's refreshing to hear that you felt that when things were really at their lowest ebb, that you could go and speak to Sarah and get that support and just kind of go through things together. And what was her response when you started opening up and talking about how you're really feeling about things?
I mean, she was just lovely. She's incredibly patient. And I think she let me explain. She let me sort of explain how I felt. There was no, like I say, she didn't immediately pack up the baby and the cat and go to her dad's. Like, she knows I'm not inherently violent or angry or a danger to anyone. So there's got to be something going on that's made this situation happen. So she was calm. She was nice. She let me talk. She told me she loved me. She told me that everything was fine and that this was just something we were going to deal with. We were going to take on. Yeah, it wasn't her against me. It was us against the problem, which was me. But yeah, we were immediately on the same side, which is, like I say, I don't know how. Yeah, if I was met with like anger or fear or That would have been way worse. That would have, that wouldn't have helped, I guess.
Yeah, it creates that safe space, doesn't it? And something that I've heard a lot in other conversations is that men often need to feel they have permission to be able to open up and talk and how they're feeling. And just the way that you spoke there, obviously, that's exactly what you had. And obviously that enabled you then to properly talk and process things that you were going through.
Yeah.
Was there a particular turning point, and is there something now that you look back on and think, yeah, that really helped me get through some of those tough times?
Yeah, there are two things. So him, I imagine this is borderline universal as well, him starting to smile at you when you're doing something to make him laugh, fucking gold dust. Amazing. You can bottle that and you'd be a billionaire. That was incredible. Because then it starts becoming, then he's demonstrably different from the cat. Do you know what I mean? He's a human being that found something funny. And that's new. That's incredible. Because at the moment, he starts off as, I guess, basically a very, very sweet potato. And then he starts to cry and he starts to have bodily functions. And then it's kind of that for a while. And that's the rough bit, I think, because that's when you're not getting a lot out of it. Not that you go into having a kid to get something out of it, but it does become quite a constant. There's not a lot of interaction, which if that's your entire day is rough. So when he started smiling and then you're dealing with, you can understand that because then you start to know what makes him laugh. You start to know what's ticklish, what faces work. And then that's the beginnings of a relationship, isn't it? That's the beginning of a back and a forth. And the person is coming out of the baby, and that's amazing. Secondly, when he started getting his naps down, became really important for me. So we're in like month sort of 3 or 4. Sarah's going back to work. I'm mostly in charge of the baby on the average day, knowing I can get him to go to sleep at 10:30 and he will wake up at 11:30, and then I'm going to put him to sleep at 1 and he will wake up at 2:30 was incredible because that's why I was quite I'm hot on routine anyway, but like, believe it or not, that's when I started to feel like I was doing something right. We'd set up a plan and it was working. You're almost communicating with the baby again. He started to become predictable. You get moments of your day back where you can feel a little bit more like you used to before. Your day was very, very different. So yeah, starting to be able to predict his behavior, starting to adapt to the situation, which is always going to happen. You will always adapt to the situation. And him starting to be him rather than a screaming baby were so important.
What's your favourite things about being a dad?
I think like him, he's the best part of being a dad, which sounds like you're sort of avoiding the question. But like he's amazing. It's like, yeah, building a relationship with someone from the ground up is fucking wild, right? Because you normally meet someone, even if you met someone when you were 5 and they've been your friend until you're 50, you still only met them when they were 5. There's still been a whole load of life before that. So learning a person as they're learning to like walk is incredible. Like he's taught himself to walk. That's insane. Like that's crazy. Like I've helped him a bit. We sort of hold him up and he walks along and it's adorable. And he can sort of walk in between us and swing along and that's amazing. But now he'll just walk about off his own accord. He's thirsty. He knows where his water is. He will go and get his water. Like that's the starting of recognizing his own needs and a thought process is really, really cool. He has a fantastically beautiful smile, which is just gorgeous. That's wonderful. And it's just, it became funner. And now it's at a place where, I know exactly how to dissolve him into a puddle of laughter by tickling his ribs. He likes being upside down. There's a lot of fun to be had as a silly man in his 30s with a 1-year-old baby that has a very expressive smile and a very giggly laugh. It's good.
Something that I found out recently actually is fathers roughhousing with their kids is incredibly beneficial to them as they get older.
Thank God.
Increasing in resilience and all kinds of things, and which I found quite a relief because I do quite a lot about the kids. So I'm like, well, I'm doing one thing that's helping them at least. So
yeah. I remember seeing my sister's husband hold his baby upside down by one hand and just dangling her, calling her the catch of the day. And I was like, what if you drop the baby? It's so scary. I'll never do that to my child. Until 5 months later, I was doing it around exactly the same door frame to exactly the same people with exactly the same phrases and body language. Like, oh shit, yeah. Glad that that's a universal experience. That I think because it was a really good way of knowing that you were playing with him. Because if they can't at the beginning, they can't really, I don't know, they might be able to hold on to their rattle and flail it around like a lunatic, or if you build a tower, they will knock it down because he can only destroy at this stage. And then you see that he has a personality. He is playful. He enjoys that stuff. That's great.
Looking back now, what advice would you give to partners, friends, family members of dads who might be experiencing postnatal depression or just might be struggling in general with the change of becoming a dad? How can they best support?
I would say, I think a really important aspect of it is if someone comes to you and wants to tell you something that they are obviously terrified of telling you, the best reaction is not to be really angry or scared at them. If someone has come to you with, I'm scared because I'm feeling this way, don't tell them they should be scared of that and that's wrong and weird and they should be ashamed of themselves. That's just gonna spiral. If someone's come to talk to you about that, that's because they trust you, because they love you, and that they think you are a person who is able to help with that. So I think respect a role if that is what is given to you. I guess, that's a position someone has given you. By all means, say no nicely. But if someone wants to talk to you about that, it's because you're safe. Or at least they feel like that you're safe or you're the best option at the moment. So going into this with compassion is, I think, very important because I think as guys, you can feel like the monster in the room a little bit sometimes. I remember when I was 13 and people stopped smiling at me on the street when I smiled at them because you weren't a kid anymore. You'd started to look like a man, so people started treating you a little bit differently. So I think treating someone like they might be a danger if you are not sure they are is good. And if people are going to try and talk to you, try your best to listen, I think. And open and honest communication, as always, incredibly boringly, is the best outcome and process, I think, for most of navigating this stuff. Or at least I've found that with my mental health. Talking to people about it has helped.
Tom, my last question today. For anyone that's listening that is going through a bit of a tough time, whether it's postnatal depression or they're just struggling with the change to becoming a father, what message of hope would you like to share with them from your experience, and hopefully that will help them see some light at the end of the tunnel when sometimes it's hard to see that?
You will, like I said, you will almost certainly learn to adapt. It will, like with any life upheaval when it first happens, very sudden grief, for example, feels like it is inescapable. That's your brain doing its job. Basically, it's not your brain doing its job. It's your depression doing its job. Your depression is trying to keep existing for as long as possible. And it does that by telling you that it's always been here, it will always be here, and it will never go away. Whereas it will. You will adapt, you will learn. And what seems like an unassailable situation at the moment will change. the baby will change, they will grow, they will learn, and you will find something to love. You will absolutely find it.
Tom, thank you for your time today. I've found myself hanging on your every word, I must say, because I can really relate to it myself, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will as well. And I think it's so important to have more of these conversations. I really do, because it is just something that is not spoken about enough, I feel. And
yeah.
I think, you know, as guys, sometimes we might feel like second-class citizens almost when we're fathers, whether it's kind of told to us indirectly or not. And I think it's just remembering, as you said earlier in the conversation, to be a bit kinder to yourself, give yourself a little bit of a break. You know, you don't have to get everything right all the time. And it's absolutely fine to admit that you're struggling. That's not a failure on yourself. Again, I think my biggest takeaway from our conversations is just remembering that whatever age your child is, you are that age as a parent. And I think, if nothing else, if you can just remember that one sentiment, that will just help you in so many facets in terms of, you know, not putting too much pressure on yourself, giving yourself a bit of time to breathe, which will ultimately help you show up and be a better father and partner and husband as well. So thank you so much, Tom. Honestly, this has been a really important and powerful conversation today.
No, I'm glad. Thank you very much for having me.